Welcome, welcome. We'll get formally started about 7:05. Let hopefully some more people float in there. There's more registered than over here. There we go. I will note that our Teacher Resource Day is this Saturday, giving away lots and lots of rocks and fossils and some really amazing stuff this year, and chemical glassware from the Wells College chemistry lab that Wells College closed this spring, unfortunately. But that'll benefit our teachers some.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Oh, good. Hello. Oh, shoot. Am I on camera yet or no? I'm trying to get it on. Allow Zoom. Back on. I'm not on camera though, huh? No?
Nope.
It's not working. I keep trying to turn the camera on and it won't go on. That's all right. I mean,
Yeah.
Allow Zoom to access your camera. No one else is here yet?
Yeah, no, there are a handful of people here. We have 8 in the meeting.
Oh, cool. All right.
So say hello, Arlene.
Oh, hello. Sorry. Hi.
Okay. So we'll formally get started about 7:05. And we're live, Ingrid, on YouTube. I remember seeing it pop up.
We are live.
Okay.
And you're the host again now.
Oh, okay, thank you. We're live, Ingrid, on YouTube. I remember seeing it pop up. Oh, and I heard myself on YouTube, I guess, coming from somewhere. So coming up, that's the last one of the season, of this fall season, that is. There's a QR code so you can donate to support Science in the Virtual Pub, and I'll put a link in the chat for the Learning Earth newsletter. And Teacher Resource Day is this Saturday. That's an event just for teachers where we give away lots and lots of rocks and fossils and other things. There's some info about Science in the Virtual Pub. That is our temporary exhibit that'll be up through the end of the year. And this is the Paleontological Research Institution, Science in the Virtual Pub. And I'm Don Haas, the host. And we will let these slides roll through one more time, and I'll say who's coming in our other sessions this fall. So tonight is Mike Hoffman. He should appear there. There he is, using the power of food to confront climate change. 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have Katie Fiorella talking about harmful algal blooms. And in November, it's moving a little faster than I thought I had it set to move. In November 14th, we'll have Alistair Hayden and Rebecca Brenner talking about vulnerability and resilience in a changing climate. And then our last session for the fall will be Stephen Koob, the Chief Conservator Emeritus from the Corning Museum of Glass, talking about the Blaschka glass models and the treatment of complex construction materials. And that's related to our Blaschka glass models and vertebrate exhibit that just opened a little over a month ago. And there again, you can donate to support, and I will put that link for the Learning Earth newsletter that came out a couple of weeks ago. It has lots of news about what's going on at PRI. And there again is Teacher Resource Day. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it off to Mike Hoffman. So go ahead and take it away, Mike. And I'm going to pour my beer, which is
And I'll have a sip of Chardonnay. Thank you, Don. Share the screen.
You were sharing it well in rehearsal.
Yeah, that's normal.
Yeah, there we go.
That
All
okay?
right. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about something that we all enjoy on a regular basis, food. But it has a unique power, and that's basically the story I'm going to tell to help us confront climate change. And part of the talk will be on that topic, but also I'm going to drop hints now and then in my experience talking so many times about climate change. Some of the things I picked up along the way that may be of interest to those in the business of communicating the climate change story. So a little bit more about me. In the upper left, that's me milking a cow in Costa Rica several years ago on vacation. We arranged for me to tour a little farm where they made this amazing cheese. And of course, the tourist gets to milk the cow. And I had that cow dry in about 3 minutes, which completely amazed the farmer and the tour guide. But I did grow up on a farm where I milked a cow every morning, and like riding a bicycle, you don't forget it. There's also way in the upper left-hand corner, it's hard to see, but it's a big rubber bag, and the farmer would put manure in there, and basically it was an anaerobic digester, and it produced fuel for the cheese house. And guess what I got excited about? That. So they had another oddity with me. I got excited about what they were doing with the manure. Below that, I've worked in major agricultural areas in California, Arizona. And again, I grew up on a little farm in the Midwest. So I've had my hands in all scales of agriculture. Upper and middle, I've held multiple leadership roles at Cornell, and anybody in a CEO position or leadership role better be looking at the big issues, and climate change is one of them. In the middle, 2 daughters and a son-in-law. Yes, they all went to Cornell. And I think we all know climate change is personal because they will face the brunt of it. Upper right, eCornell, I teach an online course called Climate Change Leadership. And many of the students are international, especially with NGOs around the world. And they tell some pretty difficult stories, such as we can't get the medicines to our patients because the roads are gone. The little heart below that, a little over a year ago, I had, don't do this at home, multiple cardiac arrest. And you come through that just fine, but also makes one pause. And I looked at what I do and I said, I ain't changing a thing. United States Marine Corps, 4 years in the Marine Corps, a year in Vietnam during the war. I put that out there because it really helps with conservative audiences. And like most of us, I love to eat and drink. And for my mashed potatoes, it's 2 parts butter and 1 part potato. So it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster ride. The guy on the right, climate change is that way, and he's not doing well. Image in the middle, you got to be kidding me. And on the right, yeah, maybe there's some opportunities in all of this. But what I like is confronting climate change, thus the title. I love this quote from Edward Abbey, better a cruel truth than a comfortable delusion. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lay out the truth. I think most of you are aware of this. Touch on that. Talk a lot about food, and then some of the things we can do, even using food, as I said, the power of food. Yes, this is the Earth. Carl Sagan says it well. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. Well stated. Most of you are aware of this. Climate Change 101, sun radiation hits the surface of the earth, warms it, that radiant heat goes upwards into that very thin layer that we live in, the troposphere. Just the right amount of greenhouse gases in that layer for the last 10,000 years, nice balance. But of course, now we're pumping more and more greenhouse gases into that thin layer. So when that radiant energy goes up, more and more of it captured. That layer is warming around the globe. That's global warming, which results in changes in climate. Like those of us who live here in Ithaca, I've been here 30 some years. The winters are a lot less severe than they used to be. The climate in Ithaca has changed. Weather is what's happening more or less outside right now. And of course, it's not natural. But to give you some idea how high that layer is we live in, basically, commercial jets fly more or less near the top. So if you're in there in a jet looking down, you're looking through that layer. Or if you walk to campus very early in the morning, look up and see all these jet trails above us, you're looking up through that very thin layer. And this generally does get people's attention. They simply think, you know, the air above us, the atmosphere is infinite. Well, it's not. 80% of the action is occurring in that thin layer. The only graph I'm going to show, but as of yesterday, we had 422 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. A year ago, 218, we're gaining 3 to 4 parts per million per year. And you've seen the hockey stick graph, of course. Industrial Revolution, we started burning all the fossil fuels and that CO2 concentration just took off. We're 50% higher than we should be with CO2, and it's going to take a long time to rebalance things. A different approach to thinking about the atmosphere. A bathtub. Yes, that's me. Not my legs. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, the faucet, that is the greenhouse gases going into the bathtub, the atmosphere, and the drain, the flow was about equal. So it wasn't getting, you know, the bathtub or atmosphere wasn't filling up. But now the faucet is turned up. The bathtub is filling up with greenhouse gases. The goal now is to stabilize. I'm not going to turn it around real quickly. So the black line used to be where it used to be prior to the Industrial Revolution. And now the red line is where we're at now. The goal is just to slow it down and stabilize it. Again, most of you know where greenhouse gases are coming from, but I always like to point to the lower right. We hear about the food system contributing up to 30-some% of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And a lot of times you'll hear the same about agriculture, but that's very different. You know, the food system includes transportation, packaging, waste, and a number of things. But if you look just at emissions from farms, it's about 11%. It's based on EPA data from the US. And we like to fly over 100,000 flights a day, over 1 billion motor vehicles. You know, we're continuing to pump a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and warming things up. Evidence is all around us. Floods, more fires, forest fires, droughts, the Doomsday Glacier. If anybody follows this in Antarctica, there's concerns about it breaking loose. When it does, probably 2-foot increase in sea level worldwide. That will take some time, but there's an enormous amount of ice behind that could then break loose. And again, that might be 100 or 200 years out, but that could lead to 10 feet of sea level rise. And of course, this is Milton, which I suspect by now is across, has crossed Florida, but we're now getting the damage reports. More intensity, more heat in the oceans, making hurricanes worse. But the one thing the models don't do, and that's predict tipping points, such as this gentleman cutting a tree down. Once that tree has started, like this one, there's no turning it back. These are the more scary items, such as permafrost in the Arctic melting, releasing methane. Methane causes the atmosphere to warm. More melting, you get the idea. On and on and on, essentially irreversible. There's a number of these out there that scientists are getting more and more concerned about. A survey recently of 400 senior authors of the reports that are done by the United Nations on climate change. Most think we're going to go right past that 1.5 C or roughly 3 degrees Fahrenheit. 80% think we're going to go past 4.5 in this century, and 40% think we're going to go past 6 degrees Fahrenheit. Their assessment is semi-dystopian, future of famines, conflict, and mass migration, but they're not giving up, nor should we. Another paper just out in Nature, half of humanity could be facing food scarcity, higher deaths, and extreme heat this century. And there's a picture of someone with a temperature of fever, and you can imagine, even our bodies being 6 degrees warmer, that's pretty uncomfortable, let alone the entire atmosphere. So we're playing a very dangerous game with climate change. And for some, especially the younger, let's see here, it's 16 to 25-year-olds, 3/4 of them describe their future as frightening. 40% are hesitant to have children. Eco-anxiety is on the rise. How are you? When I ask students this question, I will often hear hopeless, uncertain, overwhelmed. Generally, the terms are not very easy to absorb. But there are ways of dealing with eco-anxiety or climate anxiety. Your feelings are justified. Connect with nature. I was just reading a review today or yesterday on the importance of connecting with nature. It is one of the best ways to deal with climate anxiety. Those of us in the business of climate change try to keep up on the news, but don't doom scroll. It can take a toll. Work with others, join up. Action is the antidote for despair. So be careful of burnout, choose your battles. If you're not alone, get help. And as I mentioned at Cornell to audiences there, the Cornell Health Center now has a program specifically on climate anxiety to help students and others. Why tap the power of food to tell this story? I think most of you are aware when you're talking about climate change, it has to be relevant. And to the best of my knowledge, we all eat. Food, it's part of our cultures, family traditions. I'm not sure about anybody else, but I can get really emotional over a good meal. In fact, not that long ago, my dear partner of 50-some years, I'm sitting across the table from me, and she is an outstanding cook. And I just looked at her and said, "Don't ever leave me." Food's enjoyable. Those alcoholic beverages, social lubricants, have a role in moderation. It's easy to talk about. So there's unlimited stories to tell about food and what's happening to it because of climate change. This story is directed at the rich world, the US in particular, because cumulatively we pump more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than anybody else, and we've got the capacity to make a difference. And George Bernard Shaw says it well. There is no love sincerer than the love of food. And love of the next generation is the greatest motivator for action on climate change. And I love asking this question: what does food mean to you? The answers I typically get are family, friends. For me, it's joy, because I just enjoy food, but also family. It's a kind of a neat question because it's really telling about how important food is to all of us. You'll also hear, well, it's a necessity, which of course it is. The first question in this story is, where does food come from? Usually when I have a live audience, I can ask questions, see how they know, but avocados mostly from Mexico, coffee from the coffee belt around the tropics, teas from Asia, sushi rice, 99% of it, of the sushi rice we consume in the US comes from California, cashews, Vietnam. Bourbon, personally, I don't really care as long as it's available. Blueberries in the Northeast, we get a lot of blueberries and other fruit and vegetables from Peru and Chile during the wintertime. Beef, if it's grass-fed, a lot of it comes from Australia. And fish sticks, a unique story. The fish sticks are typically made out of pollock, which are captured in the North Sea. It's about $1 billion industry a year, shipped to China for processing and then imported into the US. Quite a trek to get our fish sticks on the table. Now, let's not forget, when we say, where does it come from? It's people, just not some location. Someone picks that avocado, their hands are on it. Someone's capturing that crab or fish. But upper left, well, local farmers market. So there's a farmer somewhere within 20 miles or so or less stocking the farmer's market. The woman in the upper right is pollinating vanilla blossoms in Madagascar. Each blossom has to be hand pollinated. That's natural vanilla, which constitutes about 1% of the vanilla we consume. The rest is synthetic. Middle on the left, farmer producing milk and cheese for us out of Georgia. There's that Australian gentleman growing grass-fed beef. He's got a good smile on his face. He's got a good market in the US for his grass-fed beef. Lower left, one of the most dangerous jobs in the world is fishing the Bering Sea. Family in the lower right, growing cacao in Western Africa, making $4 a day. So some facts about farmers and ranchers in the US. They constitute 1.3% of the employed population. That means 1 in 75 employed people in the US are either a farmer or a rancher. 98% of our farms are family farms. 50% require off-farm income. It is a hazardous business. Not only is it, say, the primary farmer, but family members are out there on heavy equipment. It's dangerous. And some places in the US, regions of the US, the rate of farmers is much higher than the population surrounding them. It's a tough business, and climate change is making it tougher. The data shown here in the bar graph. So on the left, 89.1% of our farms are small farms. And I want to point out that in defining the term production here, it is everything. It could be food, it could be animal food, it could be biofuels, it could be cotton. So it's a broad, the term production captures everything, let's say, more or less produced on a farm. But if you look at the orange bar, so those 89.1% of our farms are producing about 17.8% of all of those products. Then if you move over to the third bar, you'll see that the share of our farms here is a little over 3%, but their production constitutes 46.5% of all those products that I mentioned. Non-family farms, about 2%. And again, production here is about 17% of the total. Sometimes I show this and people simply don't believe it. They think everything is a corporate farm, non-family farm, etc., but that's really not the case. How are plants changing? How's our food changing? Well, plants need air, CO2, water, temperature, and soil, and sunlight. Everything's changing except sunlight, and I'm going to walk through that. Let's start with increases in carbon dioxide. You'll hear climate change deniers say, wait a minute, climate change is good. It's beneficial for crops. In fact, 95% of the crops benefit from increases in carbon dioxide, but the consensus is more extreme weather will pretty much offset in general any gains. Weeds will become more difficult to control with some of the herbicides, but probably the big one is on the bottom, and I think most of you are aware, but the nutritional quality of some of our major crops like wheat and rice are in decline. And by mid-century, for example, vitamin Bs in rice will be down about 33%. And that protein and vitamins and minerals applies again to some of the other crops like wheat in the long term. This is a big issue, especially when you think about rice and the billions of people that depend on it, many of whom are already on nutrient-challenged diets. Not all bad news in vegetables. All of those compounds on the left are increasing. sugars, antioxidant capacity, ascorbic acid, flavonoids. And since one of my daughters really wants me to eat kale, maybe someday kale will taste better. Hard to imagine, but I guess it's possible, thanks to climate change. Even this one surprised me. So last year, with all that smoke coming from Canada, that's a picture I took on the road street in front of us. That's the sun up there. But guess who can't escape that smoke? Cattle, dairy cattle, beef cattle. They're out there, and there's plenty of research showing now that it does affect their health. The immune systems are compromised. There's a higher rate of losing calves because of the stress. So they're under stress from smoke, and it really shouldn't be of any surprise. But it's one of those things we don't think about very often. Changes in water, where it falls, when it falls, how it falls, and what form it falls, changing. We're now experiencing more whiplash. I think, again, California was in a mega drought for 20 years. Now they're back to average annual precipitation, maybe a little bit higher. There's concern about drought returning, part of that whiplash. Italy, for 2 years, was in a drought last year. Heavy rains severely damaged about 5,000 farms. Ice melts when it gets warm. We import $5 to $6 billion in agricultural products from Peru and Chile every year. To a large extent, they depend on meltwaters from the ice cap in the Andes, which will be gone in about 15 years. If you want to look at a bigger picture, but longer term, concern about loss of the ice in the Himalayas, which now helps provide water for 1 billion or so people on the plains below. That will disappear in the long term. Drought, I mentioned whiplash, where on the left, this is 2021. You can see the darker the color, the more severe the drought. The West was in a severe drought. Now, if you look 2024, things are much better. But again, it's going to be a whiplash effect. You can see some areas even now that are in major drought. Looking to the future, this is towards the end of the century. By the upstate New York or Northeast, we're going to continue to gain annual precipitation. We're up about 5 inches now. But look at the rest of the U.S. It's going to get drier and drier. So we will have water in the long term. And even hail is changing. That little ice crystal gets thrown up into the colder atmosphere more and more because of turbulence, and the hail gets larger in some regions. In other regions where it's simply too warm, hail will actually get smaller overall. This is a slide I put together several days ago when the first reports were coming about agricultural losses from Hurricane Helene. In Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, East Tennessee, cotton was damaged because it was in the early stages. The bolls were starting to open up, but when it rains like that, they get stained. Citrus, avocado, and pecans. Pecans in particular were hit hard. Those are pecan trees in the upper left. Mature trees that are 40 to 50 years old were knocked down. It takes 20 years for a new tree to start to produce. So that's a real bad situation where you've got mature trees like that knocked down. It takes a long time to get started up again. And then think about all the things, no way to transport milk to the processing facilities, etc. Lots of losses in farm infrastructure, like the chicken facilities in the lower right. Fortunately, there weren't any chickens there at the time. And think about this mixing feed for your animals or poultry. There's no power. So it's just an amazing ripple effect across agriculture, which oftentimes doesn't get into the press. That obviously legitimately human mortality gets paid more attention than economic loss, but let's not forget where our food comes from. And everything I'm trying to convey here is it's a story to tell others and say, listen up. This is what's going on with something really important to you, food. The oceans, phytoplankton, in some areas are in decline. By the way, they produce half our oxygen, but they're also the basis of the food chain in the oceans. Without them, that chain, that process up through the chain to the fish we consume is at somewhat of an increasing risk. Ocean acidification affecting creatures that form shells. Oysters shown there. This is pollock. Another story about pollock is the young feed on the algae on the underside of ice in northern latitudes. Well, the ice is melting and retreating, so there's less feed for the young pollock. And over the last few years, there's been about 10 billion snow crabs dying in that same area. The water's getting warmer. Their metabolism has sped up. They're hungry. They need to eat more. Well, basically, there wasn't enough food. All of them wanted to eat more. There wasn't enough there. They're all after it. So a loss of about 10 billion snow crabs. Temperatures, I'll just point to one. I think many of you are aware of the loss of winter chill. In 2017 and last year, Georgia had very few beaches, mainly because the preceding winter was too warm. And as you think you're aware, without the right cold temperatures to induce this winter chill or dormancy state in fruit and nut trees, they don't bear. On the other hand, the image in the middle up there is citrus. 10 years ago, there were 5,000 citrus trees in Georgia. Today, 500,000, because conditions have moved north such that citrus does well in Georgia. Add to that, tremendous losses in Florida to the orange crops because of a disease, but also hurricanes. This is a paper in ProPublica, but it was actually in National Academy of Sciences initially, showing sort of the optimal area where we live, the dark green area, the most suitable zone. It's an article about human migration. 2017, that optimal area moves very far north, which means the southern part of the US is simply going to get very hot, very humid, and almost unbearable. But not only people move, but crops are going to move as well. If you look at this article, you will see this table, and the higher the number, the greater the change. So I'm just going to pick on number 2, Pinal County, Arizona. Obviously, it's going to get hotter, more humid, wet bulb. Yields and crops are going to be affected. Again, the higher the number, the greater is the impact. Sea level rise, they're a long way from the ocean. That's not a concern. But here's Tompkins County. A lot of low numbers. So personally, we are not moving. This is the place to be, given climate change. Getting food to the table is becoming more challenging. For a number of years on the left, the Panama Canal water level was low, so they had to reduce the number of ships going through. There was a backlog of like 200 ships waiting to get through. That sand lot there to the right is actually the Mississippi River. This is the 3rd year now that drought has affected and dropped the water level in the Mississippi right when the Midwest is in its major harvest of grains, much of which goes export down to Mississippi. But now they have to use other means, and it's much more expensive to move those grains out of country for export. So if you look along the bottom, you can pretty much find issues related to the entire food chain, whether it's distribution or manufacturing, people can't get to their employers or to their place of work, et cetera, raw materials in trouble. So the whole food chain also needs to be looked at really carefully, especially by companies that bring in produce from around the world or raw products. So let's look at a meal. Everything you're looking at is changing. Let's just walk through a few. We'll start with those social lubricants. Wine grapes, if they get too hot, they're more acidic. Sugar content changes, flavors, aromas can affect the wine. Specialty beers in California during the drought, they would tap local streams for their beer. But when the water levels drop, the mineral content goes up. It affects the flavors of the beer. And no, you can't pump it out of the ground because you get the same issue with the minerals. This industry is also water intensive. I was actually invited to speak at a craft distilled spirits craft show once. Their main question is, Where do we put our facilities if water is going to be at risk? Here is the ultimate Bloody Mary. That's a slider with lamb, made with lamb and venison, a boiled egg, sweet corn. That's breaded okra on top of the bun. The vodka is peach vodka from Georgia. Remember the story I mentioned about peaches, celery. And it was actually the beginning of a documentary film that we had to walk away from. But this is what's changing in that drink. Okra can now be grown in Wisconsin. Pepper gets hotter with hotter and drier conditions. Celery, vitamin C is up. The bun, potatoes in some parts of the country and the world are at some more risk. They're doing okay. You name it. There are stories to tell. And this was a heck of a way to start. And by the way, I did eat this one. And about a meal and a half. Salads, avocados in California, probably out of business in 20 years because of higher temperatures. Lettuce on the salad production will actually expand because of warmer winters. Tomatoes will get sweeter, onions more pungent, lots of things to talk about, even in a salad. Main courses are fish species, marine life. A lot of species are moving. The asparagus under that delicious piece of fish needs cold temperatures during the winter. Warmer winters are affecting asparagus production. Chicken, probably okay, because most is produced in confined or indoor facilities where they can control some of the temperature and humidity. That burger in the middle, I mentioned the beef and smoke. Also, the price of beef is going up because the feed cost for beef has gone up because a lot of the land for grazing is essentially under drought conditions. And up above, I mentioned vegetables, but the stories are just about endless that you can tell if you just sit in front of a meal or look at a menu, the things to talk about. Spices from India, the monsoon has changes, rainfall has changes, and it's getting much higher. Those are hotter. The potatoes above that are fish and chips. The chips in the UK a couple of years ago were much shorter because of a hot, dry summer. People noticed their chips were shorter. Desserts, I can't talk about coffee, it makes me cry. Chocolate or cacao grown in Western Africa is changing because of increasing droughts and poor farming practices and some other factors. Vanilla that might be in that ice cream is also, if it comes, the natural vanilla coming from Madagascar, more hurricanes hitting or cyclones hitting it and putting that at risk. Here's a game you can play. Grab your computer or smartphone and do a search, climate change, and then insert your favorite and see what you have. I'm going to say at least half the time, if not more, you're going to find the story. So make your list. That's mine on the left. Chardonnay, etc. All the way down to pecan pie. And you can do a search and there's a story behind each one of those. Kale, you can add that to the list too. It's sort of in the list. That's my son-in-law. And the same daughter that makes me eat kale is making him eat a kale drink, needless to say. He's not enthused about it. And it's not just food. I did a piece in Fortune magazine recently about climate change impact on cosmetics. It's extensive and it's an amazing story to tell. Think of the flowers, think of the oils used in cosmetics, etc. It goes the long list, and many are changing. Pet food, hey, our food's changing, so our pets, the food we feed our pets. Cotton, a water-dependent crop worldwide. A lot of places, they simply aren't getting enough water to produce cotton like they used to. And of course, medicinal herbs are changing. Anytime you change the temperature, the soil, etc., the phytochemicals in the plant change. And this is serious. Without ice cream, there'd be darkness and chaos. And my quote, melting glaciers are bad enough, but the loss of coffee is downright terrifying. Anybody care? We actually did a national survey a couple of years ago and asked a series of questions. About 1,000+ people were surveyed. And we asked, are you concerned about climate change impact on food choices? The blue is Democrat, the red is Republican. And I'm surprised that, 61% of the Republicans are concerned about climate change impact on food choices. Would you pay more if something's grown using climate-friendly practice? Same results, more or less. Are you interested in learning more? Same thing, more or less. I'm really, really pleased in a sense that maybe, just maybe, could help cross that political divide. Then you ask the standard question, is climate change a crisis? 59% of Democrats said yes, but only 20% of the Republicans. Talk about food? Darn right. 3/4 of us talk about food often or occasionally. Talk about climate change? Not as much. How about we try to meld these conversations using food? And we had an open-ended question. What's the first word that comes to mind when you think about the effects of climate change on food? 20% of the respondents used the word famine, hunger, scarcity, starvation, and shortages. So it's on people's mind. To me, it's an opportunity. It's an opening for us to help tell the story of climate change. So here we are. Let's confront climate change. And I love this word because its synonyms include challenge, tackle, threaten, meet head on, face up to, or defy. Or of course, we can be depressed, overwhelmed, and ignore or deny. But let's stick with confront. What's being done? I think many of you know about climate smart farming, focuses on promoting soil health. So many positive benefits from a healthy soil. Diversify your crops where you can. But if you lose a few, you've still got an income. In the middle, food and beverage businesses are waking up, especially evaluating supply chains to see if they need to look for a new source of their raw product. What if they're shipping it through the Panama Canal over the last few years? Some of the food products were simply not making it because the ships were waiting too long to get through. Some companies are looking at alternative ingredients, and that beer in the middle, that's toast. It's actually a beer made in the UK, and it's made from wasted, what would have been discarded bread. The claim now is they've converted 3 million slices of bread into beer, and I love it. They call it toast. Science, of course, developing resilient varieties, including the use of genetic engineering, climate modeling to help those growing our food to predict, to know what's going to happen coming down the pike, so to speak. It's also an opportunity to share the value of science with people. It's important because it's going to help keep food on the table. And I like to focus on this one, the science of genetic engineering, and specifically gene editing. So there's a keyboard with, imagine 32,000 keys, and one key is being removed. Well, think of the genome of the corn plant with 32,000 genes, and you're taking one away. Gene editing is extremely precise. A lot of people, and I've had audiences, when I think about GE crops or food, my stomach hurts. But it's National Academy of Sciences pretty much said it's safe to consume. And I was in Europe in September, and they had just eased regulation on genetic engineering, which they'd been very hesitant to do, but they focused on sort of the value of gene editing. And so now they can actually make progress with that specific tool, gene editing. What to do? Talk about it, use food, learn about what's going on, focus on what's matter, get involved, find what you're best at. That could be poetry, could be art, could be music, and be the first. Peer pressure works. And as Greta says, a lot of people will say, well, I'm just one person, but she also says no one is too small to make a difference. Talk about it. Need to listen to the other party, and I'll tell a story about our trip to London, sitting next to a gentleman about my vintage. This is 2016, right after the election. And we introduced ourselves to each other, and he said, Mike, what do you do? And I said, well, I try to tell the story of climate change using food. And he leaned over and he whispered who he voted for. Of course, I looked around for an empty seat because I thought this could be a long flight. We got off that plane friends. Turned out this gentleman, the CEO and founder of a major textile company, and he said, Mike, what I'm going to do the rest of my life is keep our plastics from our products out of the ocean. That's what I want to achieve. So he was basically pretty much like an environmentalist, Maybe we had different political views, but that was his goal in life. Other things is when you talk about climate change, make it relevant. Don't pour down too many facts and don't scare people. Make it a conversation. It's not easy. Back to food. It's a common ground. Think of consumers, chefs, restaurateurs, the food industry, food media producers. There's no villains in the story. We need each other, but all telling this story about food and what's happening to it. We join forces. Can we create a great awakening or the deeper state of awareness and need for action on climate change using food? We need to act quickly and at scale. We all eat. A dream? What about a social movement over food? Keeping the food we love and need on the table. Spread the word. Climate change is a low priority in the US. It's actually ranked 19th now. And not enough people get involved in climate change political actions. But here's another opportunity to spread the word. The Food Channel, Food Network, primetime 845,000 viewers. What if they were telling this story? People go online to get recipes. Why can't we get them more information about climate change by way of food websites? Chefs, many are into it already, but they have millions of followers. They could be telling this story. So to me, food is the ultimate climate change messenger. Let's use it. I think you're aware we have a book out, tells this story of a website with 2 databases. One is on food ingredients that are changing. The other is on plant-based products. Right now, the section that only has a section on perfumes. It will expand. And as we wrap it up, I teach a relatively new undergrad course, and it's called Using the Power of Food to Confront Climate Change. So a quote from Jonathan, who graduated in 23, using food as a medium would be much more direct and effective in initiating conversation because it is much closer to people than hardcore scientific facts, melting ice, and homeless polar bears. Eve graduates in 26. In essence, the might of food lies in its subtlety, a silent force with profound and cultural and personal nuances. Hopefully, I'll be starting a new course in the spring called Climate Change in Your Future, which will include a lot of information about food. And in this course, the students can just use your creativity to create for their final reports. On the left, this student was from Honduras. Her father was a coffee producer. On the left in black are all sort of the bad words associated with climate change. On the right, the good words. And if you use your imagination, that's a coffee bean she's drawn. On the right, crack a cold one. Why you can. 2 beer bottles. Can't see it, but if you look close enough, you'll inside the beer bottle, it's the story of hops and grains, etc., how they're changing in the production of beer. Here's a poem written by one of the students, and it's powerful stuff. It's easier to read. I just cut a couple of paragraphs. From potatoes to rice, grain so grand, their future trembles in an uncertain land. Yet amidst the challenges, hope still prevails in the hearts of those who refuse to fail. So let food inspire, let flavor ignite, a passion for change, a relentless fight. For in the kitchen's dance where dreams take flight lies the power to heal, to protect, to unite. Ask the students at the beginning of the class, what do you think about your future given climate change? And look at those words: cynical, uncertain, limited, frustrated, small, hot. At the end of the class, they change from limited to hopeful. Not always. Frustration to irritated. Uncertain to frightened. This individual did not know about climate change, went from uncertainty to being frightened. Started out as small, now they're bigger. They were hot, now they're motivated. They were stuck, now they're motivated. They were terrified, now they're prepared. Because they got it. They understood the power of food and how to use it. They had something to do. And if we were together, I'd probably whip up some pancakes like this and we could talk about them, or a strawberry, oh my goodness, dessert. You could just sit in front of a plate and went before eating or even while eating. Just talk about all the changes going on. A burger, a couple of beers, or maybe a pizza. And I used the pizza in a workshop earlier this week, but it was virtual. And we went into breakout groups of 3. One person was an observer, one was a storyteller, and they had information, all this information about what's going on with a pizza, trying to convince the learner that climate change was real through all of these changes to their food, all the ingredients in going on in a pizza. And it was a lot of fun. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And we'll open it up for questions in our big crowd here. Any questions?
Rob? Oh, that was applause.
Process. He's unmuted himself, so maybe he's going to ask a question.
All right. I've been sitting outside having pizza, actually. And so I missed some bits, but I was going to ask, so as we do a lot of teacher professional development, especially with teachers across K-12, but especially high school. Have you worked with any teachers on integrating these kinds of approaches into high school science or social studies?
I've been trying more or less. I'm part of CLEAN. I mean, I attend some of their Tuesday, whenever they have once a week, they have gatherings. I've given a little spiel about this. And hopefully I'll have a couple of students that are just finishing up this semester's course to actually talk, so the attendees to a CLEAN session can actually hear from students. But I think it's wide open. I mean, I'll just use an anecdotal story that somebody read our book and was telling their 10-year-old about all the food. And apparently that kid would go to school and they couldn't keep him quiet because he was always pointing to the food that someone else was eating and telling a story. So I think it's an opportunity yet to be tapped. Because when I talk to adults, I mean, they all go, yeah, I think you're onto something here with the food story. So yeah, if you've got a way to help that happen, I'd be happy to follow up with it.
Yeah, I do know actually that a few years ago, the international meeting for the teaching of what used to be home economics, I'm drawing a blank on what they call it now, was about sustainability. The theme of the meeting was sustainability for that group. So I mean, some of the teachers are talking about it.
Yeah. And of course, food is kind of like climate change in the sense that it's very cross-curricular. And kids are already, like, just your whole message, kids are already interested in it. So, they might not know very much about what goes into food, but that's also maybe a teaching opportunity. But there are school gardens and other kinds of things that are used to teach all kinds of principles of science, and it comes up in probably almost every context. So yeah, it does seem like a real opportunity to connect some kind of like a real world thing with students, with K-12 students.
I submitted a proposal a couple of years ago to actually use one of the large Cornell dining hall facilities to get this story out, through placards on the tables, QR codes, maybe mini sessions in one of the experimental kitchens. I'm going to try it again because, again, I mean, everybody eats at Cornell, to my knowledge, and they go to dining halls. So you're going to get people who are in all kinds of disciplines. It's not just, quote, the sciences, so to speak. It could be languages, art, you name it. I think it's so, yeah, any suggestions or thoughts on getting that out there more would be most appreciated. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah.
So you're really having pizza? and if so, how are you keeping it warm?
Well, yeah, we kept it in the house. I mean, of course it got cold as we went outside, but yeah, it's been a learning process, right? It's amazing. never even think of doing some of these things until you're faced with the option, like I can either see my kids or not. Well,
Yep, you got it.
we're gonna make it happen. We're gonna figure it out. So, but yeah, nice connection.
Other questions? I could come up with one if not.
I know some really bad jokes, but go there.
Christy points out in the chat that it's consumer science. It's the
Mhm.
name of home ec these days. So, do you have a question, Arlene? I see a hand up. Nope. So, what are 2 or 3 of the foods that you miss that you? Well, let me back up. Are there foods you've stopped eating because of their climate impacts?
Well, let me do it this way. When we wrote the book, we sent it out to all kinds of technical reviewers, and I had written the one on beef, and I said we should tell people to stop eating beef. The reviewer said, great, you just lost 95% of the US population. So frankly, I've been a hypocrite to do that. Basically, treat red meat as a delicacy, not a staple.
Yeah.
So yes, changing in diet, but it's not, I mean, that change alone would be enormous. Just people, forget the steak, have a pasta dish with a little beef in it or something.
Yeah.
And yet, most people say, well, yeah, I could probably do that, whether they do it or not, but at least they, it's not flat out. And that's the end of the conversation. Don't eat meat.
Yeah, eat meat 1 less day a week for starters.
Right.
Yeah, I've been mostly a vegetarian for over 30 years now, and Diet for a Small Planet was the book that probably was my tipping point for that decision. It's been around. That book's been around for a long time now.
Sure it is. Well, just to support some of this, I did the thing with employees on earlier this week, and it was well received. So we're going to do it twice a semester, and then there's a special session in January. I mean, it's such a different way to tell this story than what most people hear. And in our book, we spend 1 paragraph on what agriculture contributes to the climate. So the story is very different. It's really trying to use food to raise awareness and action than the typical story of, kind of the negative story about farming, et cetera, which I'm not saying isn't legitimate, but instead of negative, it's giving all of us a tool.
No questions from Bryce? He's like,
well, this is very, very interesting talk. I couldn't count and begin to count the number of details that I was totally unaware of. But it's not just that the zones where a particular crop is grown can simply move further north or further poleward, because the conditions up there might not be what you needed in the first place, and the people up there aren't used to raising chickens instead of cows or whatever the change is. So it's not just a matter of, oh, we'll just do it in a different place, because people do it, of course, and there are other factors besides the temperature, and of course you have the water and so forth. No, you brought out a lot of very interesting points. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on that. Okay, great. You're going to move a crop north. Well, what about transportation of the product when it's grown? What about all the infrastructure that goes with processing that crop from the field to the table? I mean, yeah, it's it's a huge endeavor, and it's not simple. Conditions might be right, but there's a lot that goes with it, like you just said. And who's going to do it? I mean, we've all experienced these things, like, well, let's break up all those big farms in the Midwest and let's get people out there and each give them a little piece of land. Right. It's not easy.
I know farmers. I don't want to be a farmer because that's
no.
much work.
Oh, and I love this. Years ago, today they'd be called focus groups, but we had this grant, I don't know, USDA grant, to build bridges. So we had a series of these meetings where we would invite an organic farmer, conventional farmer, an environmentalist, and a couple of people from Extension to sit down and have a conversation. And I always asked the farmer, in this case, it was the conventional farmer, so why do you farm? And he paused and he said, I farm because it gets me closer to the soil, closer to my children, and closer to God. Pretty hard to argue. That individual is not out pillaging the planet. And it turned out the environmentalist there was, you all remember Alar? Removal of Alar from the market. There was a product used in apples, I think, to ripen them.
Mm.
Well, the individual who got Alar off the market was in that room. And they had never realized what their decision or their effort resulted in harm to so many farmers that now, at the time of this meeting, they were actually investing significantly in helping to market apples grown in the Northeast into New York City. But the point is, they just didn't know, the direct impact that change was going to have on people trying to make a living off the land. I'm not saying it was the right decision, wrong decision. They just didn't realize the significance of that.
Yeah, I just a thought related to the migration of where things can grow reminds me that I learned 20 years ago, I guess, that the westward migration in the U.S. after the settlement of, after white people came here, was almost due west because the same line of latitude has similar farming conditions. And that's part of the reason why, Geneseo, Illinois is named after Geneseo, New York, and it's pretty much on the same line of latitude as with Parma, New York, Parma, Illinois, Parma, Ohio, and Parma, Michigan. They're all named after the one they moved from.
Well, this is worthwhile. This is worthwhile. I learned something tonight.
Yeah. I'll try to remember to find for that.
Yeah.
And now that line, I guess, is curving, but we don't have resources to exploit freshly in quite the same way we did 200 years ago.
Well, I'll be in California on Monday giving a presentation at UC Davis. It'll be good to sort of get feedback from people in California.
Any other questions or closing thoughts? Thank you very much, Mike. I'm sorry the crowd was so small.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. It's a great topic.
Yes, it is. It is.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's all right. All righty.
Yeah.
Sure.
And the YouTube recording is automatically up on our station, but I'll link it to the page for the Science in the Virtual Pub, and I'll send it to you. And I will also note that as we've been sitting here, I've been getting texts with pictures of the aurora. So apparently the aurora is visible in upstate New York, like right now.
Well,
Outside.
I know where I'm going now.
Cloudy here.
That's too bad. It's clear here, I think. So, all right. Thanks so much, and we'll be talking.